I've started recording. Thank you.
Hello everyone, welcome to Artist Loft 101 Drawing. This is an ongoing series that I have partnered with Michaels to bring you. And this is actually a repeat of the very first class in the series, Intro to Graphite and Drawing Forms. So if you are returning and you've been here for all of the classes so far, this is going to be a repeat, but every time I teach the same thing, I always teach it a little bit different or have some new insights to add. So you'll definitely get something new out of it, even if you have seen or attended the class before. So my name is Adrienne Hodge, and I am a teaching artist based in Austin, Texas, and I'm also a practicing artist. So I'm joining you from my studio here where I create work and sell work and exhibit work here in Austin. And I've been a teacher for about 12 years. I've been teaching adults for almost that long. And yeah, that's, I could tell lots more about myself, but I want to move on to talking about what we're talking about in tonight's class. So we'll switch to my tabletop view. So anything that you create in any of these classes, any of the cataloged classes on YouTube or the Michaels website, please tag your work with the hashtags Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram, and you could tag me on Instagram with your work as well. I love to see it. And if you are interested in signing up for any of my independent classes, you can find me really easily online by searching for my link tree. And so it's just linktree/Adrienne Hodge. And there's some more information about where to find me on Facebook, etc. And there is some of my work that I do with mostly calligraphy ink. So I work with a variety of water media and 2D mediums. So I do a lot of drawing and painting in my personal work, and collage, some mixed media stuff, but very water-based and primarily using calligraphy ink. So you can check out anything I've got going on, usually on Instagram. Okay, so I have a little list of objectives for tonight's class, since it is the kind of the building block class in this series that I'm repeating tonight. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to cover, but we're going to cover a lot of these points pretty quickly. So in tonight's class, you'll learn the meaning behind the numbers and letters on art pencils. You'll learn which pencils are optimal for your various drawing needs. You'll learn the benefits of holding art pencils in a specific way, and I'll give you a few options for that so it's not super specific. The definition of contour lines, the difference between 2D and 3D, how to observe contour lines, the definition of value, and how to begin sketching contour lines and value shapes. Okay, so for those of you who have been joining me all along, does anybody want to tell me what are contour lines? And this is the image that we advertised the class with. So as a cheat, a little hint for people who didn't attend the classes before, who don't know, what do you think they are based on this image? And I'm going to let Kelly give me the best responses there.
Okay, a bunch are rolling in right now. Sorry, Lisa says lines that follow the shape of the object. Andrew says lines that help show value. Camilla says outline. Delaney says they are the lines that are the shape. And Yana says perspective.
Okay, so yeah, I'm hearing a few things that are correct there. So the outlines, but when we say the word outline, a lot of times, and that's correct, but a lot of times people only think about the outer lines, more like the silhouette of of a form and not necessarily all of the outlines that outline the surface of the form. So I like to define contour lines as all of the lines that cover every surface of the form. And then value is the light and dark that we see on an object or on a subject when we look out at the world. So we've had a lot of classes on value so far and value shading techniques. So I'm just going to flash this on the screen and you can find all of these classes on YouTube so far. We had a class on tonal shading, both with and without a ground. We had 2 classes on these alternative shading techniques. So tonal being kind of the standard. And then we had a class on hatching and cross hatching. And then we had a class on stippling and scribbling. So these are all ways of applying light and dark values to a form. But when you add that light and dark value, you want it to follow the contours of the form. You want it to wrap around the form if it is round. You want it to follow the surface of the form if it's flat. So just to illustrate that a little bit further, if we're talking about a 2-dimensional shape, right, that's flat. So a square would be flat, and the contours of the, of the rectangle, a square too, but a rectangle is flat. So we've got a vertical and a horizontal axis. Think about the latitude and longitude of a form, right? So a form is 3-dimensional versus a shape which is 2-dimensional and flat. So the 2 dimensions are the width and the height, right? And on a rectangle, those are both flat, straight lines. But if we're thinking about a cylinder, we've got a little bit different thing happening with the cylinder because the cylinder is round on the horizontal axis. And so you've got lines that follow a curve on the horizontal axis, but then on the vertical axis, they're still straight. And I'm going to come back to that in just a moment, but I just wanted to start the class defining contour lines and defining what I mean by value shapes. And I will go into that in more detail as the class goes on. But before I get to that, I want to talk about the art pencils. So the supply list called for the Artist Loft brand sketch pencils, and I've got the set of 12 here with a few of other pencils mixed in. So the set of 12 Artist Loft sketching pencils all have a variety of numbers and letters on them, right? So that was part of the supply list, and then also a synthetic eraser and then just some sketching paper. That's all you need for tonight. And if you don't have all of the, I'm sorry, that's not all that you need one more thing. But if you don't have all of the 12 set of Artist Loft sketching pencils, let's say you have that Artist Loft 101 kit that comes with a variety of materials, including graphite, it's going to have just the H, the HB, a 2B, and I think that's it, an H. Anyway, so if you only have a handful of the pencils, that's fine. If you only have a number 2 pencil, that's fine. I'm willing to bet there's always at this point, there's people saying in the chat that they don't have the sketching pencils. You can still take notes on all of the various pencils that I'm going to talk about tonight and then go and grab a set later. But I just want you to, we're gonna talk about them and have an understanding, and then you're gonna want a still life item, preferably a piece of fruit, since that's what I'm gonna be using. I've got this apple here. And then one other thing, actually, I keep lying and adding one more thing that was on the supply list because I forgot. But you're also going to want some twine or some yarn or some string, even like a chain from a necklace, something like that. We're going to kind of wrap that around our piece of fruit in just a moment and talk about the contour lines a little bit more. But before we do that, I just want to lay it all out here for you about the art pencil spectrum. Um, are there any questions about supplies though before I move on? Seeing some raised hands.
I think the only question right now is, what is the best way to clean your eraser?
You can rub it on the carpet, or if you don't care about your jeans that you're wearing, you can rub it on your jeans. That's kind of the best way that I know about. Or you could use like a piece of scratch paper and just keep erasing on the piece of scratch paper until the dirty part gets erased off. But yeah, those are the main ways that I know about.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, this is a thing I like to start all of my drawing and painting classes with, because even in a painting class, I encourage people to do a lot of drawing, or especially in any art class. Hopefully you've got a sketching drawing practice going on the side to supplement whatever other medium you're working with. But I find that especially adults don't know what is going on with these numbers and letters on the sides of the pencils. And also, especially adults have a hard time asking questions that they think that they should already know the answer to. And so I pride myself on just making people feel like this is a safe place in my classes. There's no such thing as, you know, a dumb question. And in fact, everybody in the room is probably wondering the same thing as you when you wonder that. And every time I've explained it, I've had people just appreciate it to no end. So that's what I'm doing here. All right, so we've got these numbers and letters on the sides of the pencils. We've got H's and we've got B's, and we're talking about graphite pencils. So the graphite in the pencils is not distributed equally throughout the set of pencils. In on the B side of the pencils, you've got more graphite in the pencil, and you've got less additives that are added to it, like wax or different types of binders that are added to the H side of the pencil. So it's just more pure graphite. So as those numbers get higher on the B side, what's happening is your graphite is getting softer, it's getting darker, and I like to say it's getting like butter, like the B stands for butter, but the B stands for black. But you can think of these pencils as hard and soft. So the H stands for hard and the B stands for black, but you can think of them as your hard and your soft pencils. So graphite is a very soft material. If you've ever worked with a graphite stick, your hands will get really messy and the graphite will just continually come off on your fingers, right? So the more graphite that's in the pencil, the softer it's going to be. So a 3B is going to be softer and darker than a 2B. A 4B is going to be darker and softer than a 3B, etc. And the Artist Loft pencils go up to 6B, but you can even find, 8Bs and 10Bs. I never had seen a 10B until teaching this class the first time last month. Somebody emailed me and said, hey, there are 10B pencils, and sent me a link to one. And I still need to try it. But once you get up to a 6B, you can really get your value to be nice and dark and solid black. So a 6B will do just fine for creating our full value scale from 0 to 10. So just to throw that back up on the screen again, we've got the value scale from 0 to 10 is how I like to label it, 10 being the solid black, 0 being the absolute white or blank paper. Okay, so you use your B pencils for all of your darker values and your shadows, right? And then in the middle of the spectrum, you've got an HB, which is kind of a cross between the two pencils. So, and you'll see on a number 2 pencil, it will say HB at the end of it. So it's kind of your standard right in the middle pencil. And then on your H side, you've got less graphite in the pencil and more binders added into it. So it's going to be a harder graphite and it's going to make lighter lines and lighter values. So when you're shading using your H pencils, that's where you'll get your lightest lights, your highlighted areas that have a tiny bit of gray in them. You'll use your H pencils for that. So, but as these numbers get higher, they get even harder and even lighter. So, a 2H is going to be pretty hard and light compared to a 2B, right? But when you start using your 3H and your 4H and especially your 5H, the graphite becomes visible. Well, you feel it, this tactile hardness that you have in that pencil. And what often happens when people use the H pencils before they have been taught the thing that I'm about to teach you, what they do is they press down really hard on the H pencil and they end up carving into the paper. And they end up with these lines that are carved into the paper, like indented into the paper, and are really difficult to erase. So raise your hand or give me a thumbs up with your camera. Let me know how many of you have experienced that, where you drew a line that was so indented into the paper that you could not erase it. I think it's happened to all of us, even if we don't want to admit it. Okay, and you're not alone, and it's very easy to do. And I'm seeing some yeps pop up in the chat right there. Okay, so what's happening when we're doing that is that, one, we're using a really hard pencil, and it's not our fault. But also we're probably putting too much pressure on that pencil and applying a lot of pressure in a couple of different ways. So most people hold their pencil when they're drawing exactly like they do when they're writing. They hold it really close to the front of the pencil near the graphite point. They hold it perpendicular to the paper, so almost straight up and down like this, and then they put a lot of pressure on it. You can still hold your pencil like that and be mindful of your pressure, but it's really hard not to apply that kind of pressure when you're holding it like that. So just to exaggerate, we're going to just demonstrate this for ourselves. I want everyone to take whatever pencil you have if you don't have an H, but if you have an H, get your lightest H. So your hardest, lightest H, that would be a 5H if you have the same 12 set that I have here, and we're going to just hold our pencil perpendicular to the page, so straight up and down. I've got it pointed right at the camera there, and hold it really close to the front of the pencil, and I want you to press down really hard and write your name. And now that's my nickname, 80, if anybody wants to call me by my nickname, like the number 80. All right, and then I'm going to try to erase that. So if you can, try to erase where you wrote your name like that. What's happening? It's really hard to do, right? It's not coming off. If it is coming off, then probably you're still seeing those ghost lines where it's still there. And then if I were to take one of my heavier pencils, like my 6B, and do some shading over that, like say these were sketching lines that I erased in my drawing, I'm gonna see almost this relief print of my name now in the paper where those lines are showing through, right? So that happens to a lot of people. And that is a very frustrating way to draw. If every time you're drawing a line that you don't want to be on the page and you try to erase it and it's haunting you forever, and then that leads to artists who are really frustrated and end up tearing pages out of their sketchbook and starting over a million times, or getting, needing a new piece of paper more often because they can't erase the lines that they put on there. Okay, so how do we stop doing that? What is the opposite of everything I just said to do? So I've still got my 5H. What is the opposite of everything we just did? So the first thing we did was we held it straight up and down like this, right? We held it towards the front of the pencil and we put a lot of pressure on it as we wrote our names. So what would be the opposite? Hint, I'm doing it right now. I'll let Kelly read me your responses. What's the
Okay.
opposite of what I
Some
just did?
responses we received is long reach, horizontal, far out, softly, hold it far from tip, hold it on the side, hold it on the top.
Exactly. Okay, so we're gonna hold it towards the back of the pencil. I'm just gonna get a new sketch paper going here. I'm gonna lift my, that's about as high as I can lift my camera. Much higher. Okay, so I'm gonna hold it towards the back of the pencil and I'm going to hold it horizontal to the page and I'm going to put very little pressure on it. So I want you to do the same thing. So hold it towards the back of the pencil, and that may feel a little funny in your hand, but sign your name like that. And I just immediately went to cursive when I did that because it just feels like a looser way to begin drawing there. Okay, so what happens when you hold it towards the back of the pencil and put very little pressure on your pencil and hold it parallel to the paper or horizontal is you can completely erase that. It goes completely away. It's like a baby's breath on the page. It's almost as if that's the way the H pencils were intended to be used. So I love to say it's as if we've all been using a trombone for a utilitarian purpose our entire lives, and now we're trying to make music with it. We're just not holding it correctly. So these art pencils are not, you know, a number 2 pencil, even though there is the HB that is, you know, in the set, but they're not meant for writing. And when you're first learning how to write in, you know, kindergarten, preschool, your dexterity that you're capable of, and I know this is the truth because I tried to get my daughter who's now 8, but when she was first learning to write, you know, her alphabet, I tried to get her to hold her pencil differently just to see how she would react to it. And she got really mad at me because it's just not, you know, for a small child, that's the easiest way for them to get a grip on it. But you, by the age of 12, if, you know, and you know, we've got a lot of kids in the group, you have full dexterity of your hands and you could draw or paint like Michelangelo if you practiced enough. You have the ability to move your hand in a variety of ways. You have the ability to still control the marks that you make while holding your pencil towards the back like that. And the benefits of doing that are this. So notice when you're doing that, where the movement is coming from. Let's all try to sketch a circle. So sketching a circle like that. So holding the pencil towards the back of the pencil. And I'm just going to focus for a second. I did not draw a perfect circle the first time, right? And I'm willing to bet none of, maybe you did. If you did, show us your perfect circle that you drew on the first time and we'll all be really amazed. But more often than not, I have to circle a few times, and I even just stood up in my chair so that I could get my full range of movement and my arm going, because the movement is not coming from my wrist. The movement is coming from my arm. It's coming from my bicep. So when I'm doing that, I have this bigger range of movement that I can do, these larger shapes that I can make, and I can actually manipulate the marks that I'm making more easily. If I try to draw a perfect circle holding it like this, I don't have that same loose range of movement. It forces me, it puts this expectation that like every line I make has to be making that circle, and it's not happening, and it feels a little a little more forced, right? And this is a looser approach. And most adults that I teach who've been drawing for a while, a lot of them have the goal of wanting to be looser with the way that they sketch and to be able to, you know, to just loosen up and get that, like, how do I get that like sketchy movement to happen in my work, right? And so that's how you do it. And if you watch, you know, a lot of professional artists on YouTube painting, same thing, they are going to be holding their pencils or their paintbrushes towards the back of the pencil or the paintbrush. It's just going to give you a better range of movement. Think about a wireless mouse. If you're using the mouse on your computer, you only have this range of movement of like what your fingers or your hands can do within the movement of your wrist being a bit locked. But if you you know, sketch like this towards the back of the pencil and the movement is coming from your bicep, you actually have a lot more range of movement, almost like a wireless mouse would give you, right? And it's a lot easier to move a wireless mouse around your desktop than it is to move your mouse on the laptop pad. It just is. Okay, so that's my little speech about that, because I always have people say, well, it's really hard for me to hold the pencil that way, and it's not comfortable, and it's easier for me to hold it like this, and I feel like I still just have more control that way. But it's also a new muscle movement, so it's something we got to practice, and the more you practice, I'm willing to bet you will prefer it. So the benefit of that overall is that now when I see the perfect circle, I can switch to, so I still had my 5H the whole time, and now I'm switching to my 2B, and I can, you know, hold the pencil a little closer to the front, but I've still got it at this angle, and I'm still watching my pressure, but I just want to get some darker lines to outline that 2D circle, that flat circle. So hopefully everybody has a nice 2D circle, and then I can erase everything that was not my circular lines. Everything that I didn't need, I can erase it. And we're about to turn this two-dimensional circle into a sphere. So if you haven't been drawing circles with me, draw one now. And yeah, keep practicing that. If that feels strange, just, you know, approach it like, you know, a muscle stretch, like it's a stretch that you're doing to train your hand to hold your pencil that way. Any questions at this point jumping out?
We have one question. How do we avoid putting the oils from our fingers on the sheet before starting?
So you can lay down like a piece of blank paper or copy paper underneath your hand, especially if you're left-handed. That can block your hand from resting on the page. And if you rest your hands on the page a lot, you might try, sometimes I like to kind of make a tripod out of my hands, like I'll hold my pinky out, and that also forces me to use my arm as my, where the movement is coming from, because it makes me kind of lock my wrist, and so then the movement is coming from my bicep that way. But yeah, you can just, you know, try to be mindful, maybe wash your hands before you draw, because you know, our hands have lots of natural oils that come out of them, and sometimes like if I've been kind of nervous or sweaty, like that happens a lot more. So but it's one of those things you kind of just have to deal with, especially if you're left-handed like me. I know I've had a lot of moments where I'm smearing my drawings in these classes so far. Okay, so we've all sketched a circle, and hopefully I've convinced you to start practicing holding your pencil a little bit different and all the benefits that can come from that. If you've been following along in these classes so far, I've talked a lot about the guitar lessons that I'm taking recently, and I'm learning how to play the guitar, and it's been a big struggle for me because I'm not naturally gifted at the guitar, but I have to make my fingers stretch and do a lot of things across those frets that my fingers are not used to doing. So just like those of you who aren't used to holding your pencil that way, it takes some stretching and some practice to just get your hand to remember the muscle memory. I'm using just a 2B right now. So now we want to turn this two-dimensional circle into a sphere. So on my smaller circle here, I'm gonna make this one look like a flat sphere. And the way I'm gonna do that is by using straight lines across it. So if I just put straight lines across the horizontal and vertical axis of this circle, it feels really flat, right? It feels like I'm looking at maybe a grill, or yeah, looks like a grill, right? Okay, so what would I need to do to make, if I'm looking at the surface of something that is curved, then I need to make sure that my lines are curving all the way around that form. So this is where having the twine or the yarn and your piece of fruit comes in. So if you prepared that stuff, I want you to grab your piece of fruit and your yarn or your necklace or your chain, and we're just gonna wrap that string or yarn or twine or whatever you have around. And it's okay if it doesn't wrap perfectly. I know mine isn't wrapping perfectly, but I'm just trying to illustrate what the contours of this form are doing. So that would be the outline of a circle, and then I made it flat. It's okay if you don't have yarn or you don't have string, you can just watch me struggle with mine here. So I wrapped it around just one time. And what do you notice about the yarn on that apple? It's not flat, right? There may be a moment where it appears flat, like right there, maybe, but then it starts to curve around the edge, right? And when I look at it from this direction, you can see that it's very curved, right? And if I keep wrapping it around, it's going to curve at different elevations. So here at the highest part of the curve, it's going to curve out more than maybe lower down on the apple, right? But it's all curved. So it's curved lines all the way around the horizontal side of my apple. And yeah, it's really okay if the yarn doesn't perfectly wrap around. I'm a visual learner, and I find in visual art, many people are as well. I know some of us learn by listening to the definition of contour lines, but some of us need to see it. Some of us need to draw it and do it ourselves, but seeing it is really helpful. So that's all I'm doing here. And then if I do it on the vertical axis, it's the same thing. It may appear straight in some moments, but for the most part, that's curved, right? And if I wrap it around on the vertical axis, I'm going to see the same sort of curve happening when I look at it from different directions. And when I look at it from the front too, there's a slight curve that's happening. It may seem straight at certain points, or it may appear straighter because the apple isn't perfectly spherical, but for the most part, we've got curved lines around the vertical axis and the horizontal axis of the apple. And then in the middle here, where it has the indentation for the stem, we've got like this wormhole thing happening where the vertical line curves drastically and goes into this vortex. And you can almost see, you know, that the coloring of the apple follows what that vertical axis is doing as well. Okay, so I'm gonna put the string away and just have my apple here off to the side, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. We're gonna just sketch the sphere here. So for a sphere, it's perfectly round. So if I start with an oval shape at the top, think about this axis. I'm gonna have it on a little bit of a tilt here, just because the way I've got my hand and the way I started drawing it. But we want a line that curves all the way around. And if at any point that line becomes straight, just try to make sure that it at least curves around the edges and hugs the edges of the sphere like a letter C. If it becomes too flat, it can start to confuse the viewer. So I like to just point out the shape of the letter C versus like the shape of a banana, because a banana can be shaped sort of like this, where it's curved on the outside, but then it feels more like a straight line on the other side of the banana. And if all of our lines are kind of becoming straight, like it starts out curved like this, but then they become straighter and straighter, then it can confuse the viewer. Anytime we're drawing when we're drawing from life, or we're trying to make things look like we see them with our eyes and in the world, we're trying to create this optical illusion on the page. And so you have to think about how the viewer is interpreting those lines. If you have lines that are straight, what you're telling the viewer is that they're looking at a flat object, or that they're looking at something that's flat. But if you curve your lines, then you tell them they're looking at something that's round. If you start off curving your lines, but then the lines become straight, the viewer can easily get confused about what they're looking at. Like this right here, I'm not quite sure if this is round or not, right? Because it started off round on this side, but then it became flat over here. So just work on curving your lines all the way around. If it didn't happen that first go, if it still feels flat, or if your lines were still becoming flat, do it again on the other side. Start out with an oval and really just hug the curves. And even if it looks a little straight at some point, try to make it just curve all the way around. Think about the letter C, how the letter C would curve, and just keep trying that over and over until you get something that feels round and spherical. And sometimes that takes a lot of practice to even get our just spherical sketch to start to look round and spherical. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the still life item, if there aren't any questions about the contour lines. So the contour lines are always going to follow every surface of that form. I've got a class tomorrow, which is another repeat class of a class from a week or so ago on drawing drapery. And in the drapery drawing class, it is for intermediate artists. So if you're an absolute beginner, you might still attend the class, but just know that I'm gonna, skip over a lot of basic concepts. But the drapery, value, the light and dark on the drapery is going to follow this flow that undulates, through the elevational lines that are going to happen on that drapery. And here's just like a quick sketch of a flower that I did where I illustrated this to a private lesson student. We kind of stopped for a second and we're like, okay, wait, the flower petal is flat in some places, but it's also curved and it dips. And so if I draw the flower petal like this and I add my shading in a way that's flat, it starts to feel like a paddle or something, right? It doesn't curve and feel like the billowy, gentle curve that happens on a flower petal. So it depends on what you're looking at. You're going to have a variety of dips and curves, but I just want you to think about the elevational curves on every surface of that three-dimensional form. So specifically, we're talking about a piece of fruit now. So if you have an apple or an orange or a lemon or whatever you have on hand, we will move on to drawing the contours of the apple. And since this is such a basic class for beginners right now, I don't expect that you're going to necessarily have all this value added to yours by the end. I kind of just did the partial value on this example just to show you how I'm going to begin to illustrate how to sketch the value shapes that come in on the apple. And also I want you to look for, like, let's just observe your piece of fruit for a second and check it out, see if it has any defining characteristics. Like mine has a nice little slash across it right there. I don't really have a lot of bruises. I've got a few flat moments, but I don't have a whole lot of like quote unquote imperfections jumping out at me. There's definitely some moments where it's a little lighter. Maybe there's a little discoloration right there. But if you've got a piece of fruit that has a lot of imperfections on it, that's great, because all of those imperfections are going to help you make this look more like an apple. People tend to want to edit out the imperfections in their drawings, but when you add them in a clever way, it gives things character, just like our imperfections give us character, right? Okay, so I am just going to have my apple right there on the page, but it's going to be at that view. So you really want your own still life item. I know a lot of people come to these classes and just want to draw the instructor's image there, but hopefully you've got a piece of fruit of your own, since mine is going to be at that, you know, looking down at it view. But I'm going to draw it the way that I'm seeing it off to the side, which is more of the entire thing. So I'm sketching still. I've still got the 2B in my hand. But you can start sketching with your H pencil. Me, if you were really liking, you know, if you were successful so far with not pressing down too hard and drawing nice and light, I'm mostly just starting with a darker 2B pencil just so that you can see a lot of my lines. If I start with the H pencil, it's going to be a while before those lines are super visible. Actually have a seat and change my view of the apple just slightly. So don't worry about a perfect sketch of the apple right now. We're just getting started here with sketching contours. And we're going to sketch out a little map, or like an elevational map of the form. And you can do this with anything you want. It doesn't have to be an apple. It could be a coffee mug. It could be anything that you've got in front of you. The reason I suggest a piece of fruit is because it's organic, and so you're not going to have too much linear perspective coming into it because it is an organic form. So a sphere is organic because you can change your perspective on the sphere, but it's not going to be as affected as a cube or a cylinder, etc. So I know I said coffee mug. A coffee mug will be a little bit more challenging if you are an absolute beginner, but you could definitely map out the elevational lines on a coffee mug or anything you have in front of you. Okay, so I'm starting with the verticals just because I've got this hole at the center and it just is speaking to me to do the vortex thing out of the center. So I can see that discoloration starts to come out of the center of the apple and guides me with lines that do the same thing. So I'm really observing closely. I'm not worrying about drawing anything else other than what I'm seeing, the change in elevation. So at a certain point, it kind of changes direction, like it feels like it's curving left to me here, but then here the line is curving and it's almost facing me directly. So I've got that little weird moment, and then it starts to curve in the other direction. So there definitely is some perspective here that feels linear, but If you're interested in more about linear perspective, the class that I just finished on Sunday is up on YouTube, and it's Intro to Linear Perspective. Okay, so it might look kind of like a pumpkin when you do that because pumpkins have those natural vertical indentations in them, right? And now I'm going to look at the horizontal axis. So I'm seeing the curve around the center there. But this is, again, it's not perfectly spherical. There's some moments where it kind of curves out a little bit more like that. Like there's some bumps, like some knobby bumps on the apple that do that sort of a thing. There's maybe one moment where it feels really round right here, but then here it kind of comes towards me and follows that dip again. So I'm just going really slowly and just looking at my apple. And like here's another bulge right here where it kind of sticks out and everything follows that bulge in that area. So you're not going to have a perfectly spherical piece of fruit, most likely. Think about if you were to cut a tree, right? Like if you cut a tree, you might have a shape that looks like something like that. And then within all the different tree rings, they kind of follow that same path. And then some of them will start to deviate, and then the next one will follow that path, only in the other direction because the tree grew out, not in, but you get my point. Okay, so once we've sketched all of our elevational curves, we can get a little more detailed here. So let's look at like the elevational curves if you have a stem sticking out of your apple. It will be kind of like a tree that's cut off right here. Like you might have a shape like that. And I've still just got my 2B. I'm just putting a little more pressure on it to get a darker line and maybe something like that. And so I can outline the contours that I'm seeing on that stem. And so you see the difference in putting in the imperfections and following the contours of those imperfect moments and how it really starts to tell the story of the apple that you're looking at. And then now I'm looking at all of the imperfections or discolorations, and most importantly, the shape of the shadows and the shapes of the light. So I have a light pointed directly onto the apple from my document camera right now. So I've got this nice white glare happening right here. So I'm going to go ahead and just sketch in the shape of that white highlight. And I'm leaving it blank because if I had time to add value to it, that would be blank, and I could erase my contour lines out of the middle there to leave it blank. I've also got a big lighter area here. So I'm looking at the lighter areas first because most of the time beginners don't think about the light area. They go right for the shadows. And yes, shadows are important to suggesting, you know, this optical illusion of whatever we're drawing, but the light is equally important. And if you want to watch any of those classes where I talk more deeply about value, I'll go in depth about why light is so important in almost all of those classes so far. But here's one of the bigger shadows that's jumping out at me. And then I've got the shadow of the apple itself on the surface of the paper. And then I've got some other kind of jump to the light and dark, but there were some other interesting discolorations happening, like out of the center of the apple here. There's this sort of a shape, which often tomatoes have like a, you know, green sprout at the top of the tomato that does that. But that's just my discoloration of the apple. And then there's all these lovely little spots that I could get in and put those there. Or if there was like a flat moment or a bruise, I could really emphasize that right now. But we're just outlining all the shapes of shadows and the shapes of the light. So those value shapes are very important. And I will talk about those in all of the classes on value, like I said, in more depth. And in pretty much every class I ever teach, I emphasize the importance of value shapes. If you were to take a longer class with me, you'd probably get sick of me saying the word value shapes because I say it so much. Okay, so I was using a 2B to sketch all that, but I'm gonna switch to my darker pencil, my 6B, and just start to add some of the value here. But like I said, I didn't expect us to get too far into the value. I just wanted us to outline it and understand why it's important. And the most important thing is as we're applying that value. So if you just want to shade in however you know how to shade, tonal shading is the one that's a smooth, continuous blend of, so smooth, continuous application of your graphite. And when you hold it towards the back of the pencil, it's easier to get an even distribution of pressure, but I'm making sure that that value is following the contours of the form. That's the most essential takeaway here, is that your value is following the curve of the form. So as I'm applying it, I'm not doing it in a flat way, because then that would suggest to the viewer that this was flat, right? So I have to make my line, my value curve with those contour lines. And then if I wanted to blend that value, I would let up on my pressure and continue adding it with a little less pressure as I go. So the more pressure you put on it, the darker the shadow is going to be. But we just want to follow the curve. And in all of those other classes, I refer back to this class so much, because this is where I'm really breaking down just how to follow those curves. And drawing those curves makes it extremely helpful to see where the curves are. So I suggest for beginners to do that as much as possible and use those kind of elevational lines as your training wheels as you're applying your value. And if you do them with a light H pencil, you can always erase them later. Okay, so when it comes to this shadow on the surface of the table though, I do want that to appear flat because the paper is flat, right? So I want that to appear flat. So I can just use a straight line as I apply my value in the shadow that's being cast on the paper. I'm just going to use like a diagonal line so that I make sure everything's following the same pass in that flat value. So since it's flat, I'm just using flat lines, and I'm leaving a little bit of space next to the apple so that I can be kind of messy as I apply it, and then I'll go in and be a little more concentrated to fill in that gap. But when I do that, that suggests to the viewer that the paper, the surface that this apple is sitting on is flat, and then in contrast, the apple's going to look more rounded next to it. All right, so it's 6:56. We've covered everything I wanted to cover. I'd like to see some of y'all's drawings so far. So I didn't expect us to get too far with the value, but hopefully you mapped out your 3 dimensions of your still life form, and maybe outlined some imperfections and some value shapes. And now you're ready to go watch another YouTube video on all the value and keep developing it. But I'd love to see some examples from the audience. If we could spotlight some people. Kelly, are we able to spotlight people?
Sorry, Adrian, we're only allowed to look at gallery view.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I'm seeing some really amazing contour drawings of some apples out there. And I see a cool lemon, and I see a lot of value being added to a lot of them so far. Well, if you guys want to post on social media and tag Make It With Michael's or Michael's Classes or Adrian Hodge Art, then I will be able to find you and see it and admire your lovely work from tonight. And yeah, so any questions before we say goodbye?
Just a lot of praise for this being such a great class. I'm reading through them. So many people are saying nice job. Thanks so much for class. One question is, can you show us how to sharpen the graphite pencils? Not sure if you have that on hand.
Yeah, if we've got a couple minutes here. So if you don't want to use your handheld sharpener, or if you noticed that I've got my pencil sharpened like that, the way that I do that is I use a utility knife or a one-sided blade. You can use an X-Acto knife, or if you are handy with a pocket knife even. But I always want to cut away from yourself when you're doing that, and you're going to basically just use a cup and you're going to whittle the wood down. So you're going to start kind of far back on the pencil, and you're going to loosely shave off the excess, like the encasing on the pencil, so that you're exposing the wood. And then you want long, shallow cuts. It takes some time and patience to do this, but it has a big payoff. And then once you get to the edge of the graphite, be really careful to keep your cuts really shallow so that you don't cut into the graphite itself. And you want to expose maybe like ½ inch of the graphite, like I've done here. And then once you've done that, you can use the sandpaper that comes with that Artist Loft 101 kit. And there's even an Artist Loft utility knife. I've been meaning to get one of those for myself. I'm just using my utility knife here, but box cutter or the Artist Loft brand utility knife would be great to do that with. And then use the sandpaper to sharpen it to a point. And so that's a really great way to sharpen your pencil that way, because it keeps you from having to sharpen your pencil as often. It exposes, so much of the graphite that you can get like a variation in your lines. You can it makes it easier to hold it on its side like that and get some nice dark pressure going. And then, I think it makes it easier to draw like this with the, holding it towards the back of the pencil like I was suggesting. So it's really helpful, because with the pencil, just as they come sharpened like that, often run out of graphite pretty quickly, and you don't get as much exposed for shading that way. And I go into more depth in that in the class called tonal shading with and without a ground, how to sharpen your pencil that way. And I'm also gonna have that pop up again in other classes. I'm gonna work that in, because I realize a lot of people have that question. All right, well, thank you all so much, and thank you, Kelly, again, and I really enjoyed it. And Wednesday, today is Wednesday, tomorrow, Thursday, we'll have the drapery class again. So hopefully you guys will join me for that class.
Thanks so much, Adrian.
Thank you again.
Bye.
Bye-bye.